So hello po everyone. My report is about psychoanalytic theory. What is psychoanalytic theory? Psychoanalytic theory is the personality theory which is based on the notion that an individual gets motivated more by unseen forces that are controlled by the conscious and rational thought. Psychoanalytic theory is the theory of personality organization and the dynamics of personality development that guides psychoanalysis, a clinical method for treating psychopathology. The founder of psychoanalytic theory. Sigmund Freud was the founder of psychoanalysis and, over his immensely productive and extraordinary career, developed groundbreaking theories about nature and working of the human mind, which went on to have an immeasurable impact on both psychology and Western culture as a whole. He is an Austrian neurologist born on 6th of May 1856. He died in England on September 23, 1939 at the age of 83 by suicide. He had requested a lethal dose of morphine from his doctor following a long and painful battle with oral cancer. He studied medicine at the University of Vienna, lived and worked most of his life in Vienna. He also traveled to Paris to study at the Salpêtrière Hospital with Jean-Martin Charcot, a famous neurologist studying hypnosis and hysteria. He also deeply affected by Charcot's work, and upon returning to Vienna, he started using hypnosis in his own clinical work with his patients. Freud developed a new kind of psychological treatment based on the patient talking about whatever came to mind, memories, dreams, thoughts, emotions, and then analyzing the information in order to relieve the patient's symptoms. His work helps to treat mental illness. The overview of psychoanalysis. It is developed by Sigmund Freud and his followers in 1890s. Psychoanalysis is explain human behavior. A set of psychosophical description of human nature, a method of psychotherapy development that focus on unconscious factors that motivate behavior and encourage the use of transference as a way of therapies to gain information and create connection between clients and themselves. Theory of personality, which is developed through different stages in life, asserts that the impact of childhood sexuality and experiences stored in the unconscious can lead to the development of adult emotional problems. Psychoanalysis refers to the psychological theory and clinical practice developed by Sigmund Freud in the early 20th century and to its later development. It is personality theory and more generally a theory of psychological functioning that focuses particularly on unconscious mental processes. Psychoanalysis is based on the concept of unconscious mental representation that are built up from childhood. This mental representation of self and other include intense and conflicted emotions. The conflicted emotions involve wishes, associated fears, and attitudes that organize compromises among them. The representation are influenced both by temperaments and experiences. The representation are linked by association mainly of affect. They are Mediated by the encompass the various groups of mental function. They can be made conscious in an affect stimulating relationship and change if they can be consciously observed and thereby better synthesized in the more adaptive ways. The psychoanalysis achieved this goal by becoming the focus of and then analyzing the patient's projection of mental representation and attitude. The view of human nature. Freud's views of human nature is considered to be dynamic, meaning that there is an exchange of energy and transformation. Freud used the term catharsis to describe this release of this energy. Freud saw the personality as composed of a conscious mind, a preconscious mind, and an unconscious mind. The conscious mind has knowledge of what is happening in the present. The preconscious mind contains information from both the unconscious and the conscious mind. The unconscious mind contains hidden or forgotten memories or experiences. Deterministic behavior is determined by unconscious, irrational motivations, the six psychosexual stages, biological and instinctual drives, libido, the life, sex instinct, goal of life gain, pleasure and avoid pain, pleasure principle. Thanatos, the death instinct, the aggressive drive to hurt self or others. Neurotic behaviors are symptoms of unconscious attempt to control the intolerable urge of sex and aggression. Freud, on his psychoanalytic perspective, argued that personality development is one of the significant characteristics of human nature that leads to a deeper understanding of the uniqueness of each person's life. Movement of individuals from one stage of life to another results in conflict between social and biological drives found within human nature. Freud's drive theory assumes that the ability of any individual to cope with his environment is determined by the individual's ability to deal with the forces within the society and learn from them. The Freudian view of human nature is basically deterministic. It is based on the belief that our behavior is determined by irrational forces, unconscious motivation, and biological and instinctual drives, as these evolve through psychosexual stages in the first 6 years of life. So much emphasis is placed on things beyond our control that we cannot change. I believe that we can take charge of our lives and that we can make changes. Though our past does affect us, I believe that we can move beyond it by understanding it and coming to terms with it. The three levels of mind. Freud likened the three levels of mind to an iceberg. The top of the iceberg that you can see above the water represents the conscious mind. The part of the iceberg that is submerged below the water but is still visible is the preconscious. The bulk of the iceberg that lies unseen beneath the waterline represents the unconscious. Perhaps the most impactful idea to put forth by Freud was his model of human mind. His model divides the mind into three layers of regions. First, each distinct levels has their own rules and function. First is conscious. This is where our current thoughts, feelings, and focus live. The conscious mind contains all the thoughts, memories, feelings, and wishes of which we are aware at any given moment. This is the aspect of our mental processing that we can think and talk about rationally. This also includes our memory, which is not always part of consciousness but can be retrieved easily and brought into awareness. Second is preconscious, sometimes called the subconscious. This is the home of everything we can recall or retrieve from our memory. The preconscious consists of anything that could potentially be brought into the conscious mind. The last is unconscious. At the deepest level of our mind resides a repository of the processes that drive our behavior, including primitive and instinctual desires. The unconscious mind is a reservoir of feelings, thoughts, urges, and memories that are outside of our conscious awareness. The unconscious contains contents that are unacceptable or unpleasant, such as feelings of pain, anxiety, or conflict. The structure of personality. First is id. This is the unconscious level only. Instinct to survive, eros, instinct to destroy, thanatos. Next is ego. Develops in infancy, keeps check on it. Last is superego, where morality resides, encourages social responsibility. In this model, there are three metaphorical parts to the mind. First is id. The id operates at an unconscious level and focuses solely on instinctual drives and desires. Two biological instincts make up the id. According to Freud, eros, or the instinct to survive, that drives us to engage in life-sustaining activities, and thanatos, or death instinct, that drives destructive, aggressive, and violent behavior. The id is the aspect of personality that is driven by internal and basic drives and needs. These are typically instinctual, such as hunger, thirst, and the drive for sex or libido. The id is also unconscious and stems from our instinctive abilities. The id acts as accordance with the pleasure principle, in that it avoids pain, seeks pleasure. Due to the instinctual quality of the id, it is impulsive and often unaware of the implication of actions. According to Freud, the id is the source of all psychic energy, making it primary component of personality. The id is the only component of personality that is present from birth. This aspect of personality is entirely unconscious and includes instinctive and primitive behaviors. Second is ego. The ego acts as both conduit for the check on the id, working to meet the id's needs in a socially appropriate way. It is the most tied to reality and begins to develop in infancy. The ego is driven by the reality principle. The ego works to balance the id and superego by trying to achieve the id's drive in the most realistic way to fit the individual in the long term. It helps separate what is real and realistic of our drives, as well as the being realistic about the standards and the superego sets for the individual. Additionally, the ego is how we view ourselves. This is conscious but not always true. For example, someone could believe they are the best looking person in the world. However, this is just an opinion they have and not everyone will agree with that belief. According to Freud, the ego, formation of ego, develops from id and ensures that the impulses of the id can be expressed in a manner acceptable in the real world. The ego functions in the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious mind. The ego is the component of personality that is responsible for dealing with reality. The last one is superego. The superego is the portion of the mind in which morality and higher principle resides. encouraging us to act in social and moral acceptable ways. Superego is driven by the morality principle. It acts in connection with the morality of higher thought and action. Instead of instinctively acting like the id, the superego works to act in socially acceptable ways. It employs morality, judging our sense of wrong and right, and using guilt to encourage socially acceptable behavior. Furthermore, the superego comes from the people around us. They affect what we believe in and how we view things. So this can be different depending on how we were raised and the culture you were around. The superego is also responsible for finding the happy medium between the id and ego. The id can sometimes be overly dominant when there are humanistic urge. The ego can be very unrealistic in terms of how we view ourselves. According to Freud, the superego begins to merge at around age 5. The superego holds the internalized moral standard and ideas that we acquire from our parents and society, our sense of right and wrong. The superego provides guidelines for making judgment. That's all. Thank you.